In episode 1 of Barry, you get introduced to Barry Berkman. He's a former U.S. Marine who is now a hitman from Cleveland. For him, killing people is the same thing as working at a Staples. The way he gets these jobs is from a family friend named Monroe Fuchs. Fuchs is kind of like his agent. After his latest job, he gets woken up in the middle of the night by Fuchs, who lets him know that the money from the job did clear. But there's a troubling trend that Fuchs has realized with Barry. He's taking too long to do the job. Barry claims that he's doing recon, but these extra expenses, one extra night in a hotel room, it adds up. Fuchs starts telling Barry he's a little bit worried for him. Barry's current living conditions, the way he's acting, it reminds him of the old Barry before Barry had a, quote, purpose. But Barry says, nah, I think I'm just burnt out. But Fuchs can't have Barry be burnt out. He's got another job for him. The Chechen mob is called. A guy named Goran Pazan needs Barry to kill somebody, but the more important thing is the money is great. Fuchs lets him know that the flight for L.A. leaves in 4 hours, but it does leave from Ontario. He claims it's to cover Barry's tracks, but Barry knows that the real answer is it's just cheaper. About 10 hours later, Barry arrives in sunny L.A. He heads over to meet Goran, but the first person he meets is Goran's second-in-command, a guy named NoHo Hank. And NoHo Hank is unlike any gangster you've ever met, mainly just because he has the sunniest disposition. Ho welcomes Barry into the house, escorts him through it, and heads to the back where Goran's waiting. Goran doesn't do much of the talking, it's pretty much all Hank. And Hank tells Barry that the mark is going to be a guy named Ryan Madison. He's a physical trainer who started working with Goran's wife and then proceeded to really work her, if you're catching what I'm saying here. He was having sex with Goran's wife. It ain't cool. You don't do that sort of thing. Now he's got to pay. That's why they called Barry. Now, the Chechen mob don't take this lightly. They're not just going on a hunch. Hank put a lipstick camera in the hotel room and actually caught them having sex. So they have video of this to prove it. Barry tells them, give me his name, give me his address. It'll be done in a couple of days. Barry then gets a package from Fuchs in the mail, and it's the gun with the bullets, no silencer, and starts tailing Ryan all around L.A. Eventually, he tails Ryan to a building, and when Ryan goes in there, he figures it might be an hour, but it's way longer than that. Barry ends up getting bored and walking towards the building and see exactly what Ryan might be doing, and he hears a woman screaming outside. Barry thinks that there's a problem, so when he goes to check on the woman, he's pretty surprised to find that she's just an actress rehearsing some lines. Her name is Sally Reed. She's an aspiring actress, and she kind of snaps at Barry because Barry showing up kind of threw off her game. She doesn't have time to practice again because she has to go in and perform the scene, and Barry follows her in. And little did Barry know that he had tailed Ryan to Gene Cousineau's acting class. Barry just kind of chills in the back, watching Sally perform. Her first performance doesn't go to Gene's liking. He ends up calling her out on it. But from that, he ends up pulling a really great performance from her, and it blows Barry away. As the class is applauding Sally's performance, Barry hears a voice from behind him that asks, hey man, are you new to this class? And it's Ryan Madison. Ryan introduces himself and explains that his partner got a catering gig, so he needs somebody to fill in. He doesn't really let Barry answer because when Gene says, Ryan, you're up, Ryan just goes, yeah, I'm going to do the scene with this guy. Ryan performs a scene from True Romance, and Ryan's great. Barry is terrible. He reads his lines extremely fast, like he's just trying to get through it. But the scene was more for Ryan anyway, so no one really even notices. When the class applauds for Ryan at the very end, the applause is like a drug for Barry. His eyes get wide. Gene comes up on stage to evaluate Ryan, but he looks at Barry and says, who are you? And Barry introduces himself. Gene tells him that he's used up his one free class, and if he wants to be in the class, he better be there on Thursday to perform a monologue. Even though Barry really enjoyed going to the class, he doesn't really have plans on actually going through with it. As he's trying to leave, though, he gets stopped by Sally, who invites him out to a local bar called Residuals to hang out with the rest of the class. Barry's got nothing to do, so he says, why not? Barry gets introduced to everybody in the class. There's Nick, who's from Florida, Jermaine, who's from Denver, Antonio's from Puerto Rico, and he just booked a big gig on CSI as a dead body. Natalie is from LA, and Sasha, I don't know where Sasha's from. I'll make it up. You're not going to fact check it. She's from Walla Walla, Washington. A song then comes on at the bar, and everybody wants to get up and dance. Sally tells Barry he should hit the dance floor, but he doesn't. What he does do, however, is kind of creepy. He sits in his chair and just stares at Sally. He's infatuated with her. But he's not the only one not dancing, because Ryan, who is drunk, is also not dancing. He moseys on up to Barry and tells him that Barry Berkman isn't a great stage name. He needs to go by something better, like Barry Block. Sally then comes over and asks Barry if he can drive Ryan home because Ryan has a lot of DUIs. Barry tells her, yeah, no problem. And then Sally kisses him on the cheek, so you can say things are getting pretty hot and heavy between the two. When Barry gets to Ryan's place, he tells Ryan that he doesn't think he can take the class, and Ryan thinks that's ridiculous, telling him he has to take this class. He even gives Barry Gene's book, saying that it changed his life. He's also willing to help Barry out with his monologue. The fact that Ryan is being such a nice guy takes Barry completely off guard. He can't kill him. Before Ryan leaves for the night, he gives Barry a big hug and then heads in. But Barry was completely unaware of the fact that he was being watched by the Chechen mob, and they saw that hug. They are very concerned. They call up Fuchs to voice their concern, and Fuchs actually goes so far as to fly to LA to talk to Barry about it. Feels like Barry's getting way too close to his mark. Barry explains that he followed Ryan all over town, but eventually he followed him to an acting class. He then hung out with the class, and they made him feel really good about himself. Fuchs, however, can't understand why Barry hung out with the guy he's supposed to kill, and he didn't just kill him. But Barry couldn't kill him because he's focused on his purpose. He thinks acting could be it, and Fuchs knows it's not. Fuchs knows that his purpose is killing people. Now, it's not like Barry is completely delusional. He does realize that most actors don't make a living doing it, so he figures he can do both. He can act during the day and do hits for Fuchs at night. Fuchs has to sit him down, though, and explain to him that that's a risk not worth taking. You don't want to go to a hit and have the guy recognize you from a commercial. He explains to Barry that once he took this job, he kind of closed the door on being anything else. When Barry starts talking about how Ryan isn't a bad guy, Fuchs cuts him off and says, you gotta kill him. These Chechens are no joke. They're the scariest people I've ever dealt with. They're talking about taking you off this job, so get it done. Barry tells Fuchs that he understands, and the next day, while he heads to the acting class, he doesn't actually go in. He just hails Ryan. But he knows where Ryan lives, and he knows where Ryan hangs out, so it's not like he can't afford himself one distraction, and that distraction is Gene. When Gene walks out after everybody else left, Barry walks up to him and asks if he thinks that Barry has what it takes to be an actor. And Gene tells him, no, you are horrible. He actually goes so far as to tell Barry to go back to wherever he came from and do whatever he's good at, because acting is not it. Barry nods and says, you want to know what I'm good at? Killing people. He goes into his life story about returning from Afghanistan, being depressed, and then a family friend who's like an uncle to him made him realize he had a purpose. The problem is, while this story is true, it's so absurd that Gene thinks it's a monologue. He's so blown away by the performance that he tells Barry, you're in, but you have to pay in cash and you have to pay up front. And that's not a problem for Barry whatsoever. Barry Berkman, who, by the way, is now going by Barry Block, is officially an actor. But he's also a hitman, so he has to do that job too. And he heads to Ryan's house, goes up to Ryan's car to kill him, but he finds Ryan already dead. He looks down the street and sees the Chechen mob. They got to him first. And now they're aiming their guns at Barry. Luckily for Barry, the gun is jamming, and Barry doesn't take too kindly to the fact that they're pointing guns at him. He warns them to put the guns down. All the while, NoHo Hank is banging on the roof for the guy to fix the gun and kill Barry. But by the time the Chechen does fix the gun, Barry unloads a clip into him. Barry gets rid of the gun and heads to a local diner to get some food. In episode 2, Barry goes through his first acting class. With no Ryan, because Ryan's dead, he's teamed up with Sally. Gene, however, interrupts the class to let them know that he's gotten word that Ryan is dead. Surprisingly, this isn't the first student that Gene's had who got murdered during one of his classes. But right away, the class goes into mourning, and Gene lets them know that they should use this in their acting. Barry, however, doesn't really know what that means, so he has to ask Gene, how am I supposed to use this? And Gene tells him that acting is all about using your past, using past experiences and emotions to create magic in the present. Barry, however, really pisses off Gene when he says, maybe we can blow off some steam by putting on some wigs and playing some fun characters. Gene takes that as Barry not taking the class seriously, and Barry tells him that he's taking this class so seriously he's ready to quit his job to pursue acting full-time. Gene loves hearing that. Total commitment. But he does let the class leave early. As the class is leaving, Sally says, we should all have a memorial tonight. Natalie volunteers to have it at her place, but Sally acts like she didn't hear Natalie and says, we'll do it at my buddy's bar. He'll get us a deal. It'll be great. As Sally is talking about how everyone's going to perform a scene in class, Barry gets a text message from Fuchs telling him that the Chechens are out looking to kill them, and he has to head to the hotel ASAP. When Barry shows up, Fuchs gives him a giant hug. He's relieved that Barry's still alive. Barry, though, is pissed off at Fuchs. He told him to leave town, and he didn't. But Fuchs says, I'm not leaving town. This is war. The Chechens hired you to do a job, and then they double-crossed you? No, I'm sticking around for this. Barry tells him it's not about that. It's about the fact that there are more guys out there. It's not just about the guys in the house, but they literally have a full country called Chechnya. It's not safe for him to be there. It's also not good for Barry's acting business either, so he wants Fuchs out for 2 reasons. Fuchs then proposes that they both leave, but Barry says, no, I'm staying. It's my mess. I'll clean it up. Fuchs reluctantly agrees, but tells Barry, you'll get on a plane afterwards and come back to Cleveland, right? Get back to work? And Barry gives a very convincing yes. As Barry starts packing up Fuchs' stuff to get him out of town, he gets a phone call from Sally. He steps outside to take it, and Sally wants to work with him that night on a scene that her and Ryan did from the movie Doubt, which, if you haven't seen Doubt, it's a pretty serious movie. Not a fun scene at all. But Barry is just so thrilled that Sally wants to work with him that he doesn't care what they're acting out. But Barry is so distracted from the phone call with Sally that he's completely unaware right behind him Fuchs is getting manhandled by Chechens. When Barry walks back into the hotel room, he gets a gun to his head, and they take him and Fuchs back to the Chechen house. They're tied up, beaten up a little bit, and NoHo Hank lets him know that he's kind of angry, but he's willing to put that aside for now because rage is counterproductive. He also is well aware that if the situation were flipped, he would have probably done the same thing Barry did. Barry reminds him, though, that Hank did do what he did. He tried to kill him. Hank doesn't want to go back and forth. He brought Barry there for a reason. He asked Barry if he took any item from the car, maybe like a small blinking item. And Barry asks, hold on, you didn't bring that stupid lipstick camera, did you? Hank gets very uncomfortable and says, no, that would be crazy, right? And then the conversation gets interrupted when Goran walks in. Goran is more upset than Hank because Barry killed 2 of his men, one of which was one of the best assassins from Chechnya. Because he killed him, he put Goran in a really tough bind. The assassin had a job to do that night. Now he can't do it. Because of that, they want Barry to do it. He's got to head to a Bolivian stash house and take out some guy. Barry doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to help the Chechens because they double-cross him, but he also doesn't want to kill some random person. Goran then starts torturing Fuchs. It doesn't last long, though, because Fuchs' screaming is interrupting Goran's daughter's sleepover, so they do have to stop. But they do put a knife to Fuchs' throat. It puts Barry in a tough bind, and he has to agree to kill the Bolivians. He does tell Goran and Hank, this is it, though. This is the only job. After this, I'm done. The Chechens agree and tell him, we're hanging on to Fuchs, though, until the job is done. But before Barry leaves, he gives them one message. If they hurt Fuchs, he will come back and kill every one of them. Barry then heads out and heads right to the bar to meet Sally to rehearse their scenes. Barry is, as usual, really bad at acting. But after a few practices, he heads out to the bar and just waits his turn. While he's waiting and the rest of the class are performing monologues that Ryan did, he gets a text message from NoHo Hank giving him the address, name, and a picture of the mark that he's going to kill. Right before Barry and Sally are going to go on and perform their scene, Ryan's dad gets up. And his dad is incredibly emotional. It gets so emotional that Barry walks out of the bar. He can't do it. Sally goes chasing after Barry to make sure he's okay, but Barry is not okay. She tries to tell him that the feelings he's having right now are the tools that he'll use in his acting toolbox. It's the whole reason the class exists. After a little bit, she's able to convince Barry to go back in the bar. They do not, however, go through the scene. Barry drives Sally home that night, and they talk about what a good decision it was they didn't do the doubt scene. She then asks Barry, what's your deal? I can't figure you out. And Barry doesn't really answer it. She then goes, no, this is a mistake. This is always a mistake. He's fine with that, but then she invites him in to talk about why they shouldn't sleep with each other. To her surprise, he says, no, I just wanted to walk you to your door. But Barry has a problem. The cops found that lipstick camera. The lead detective is Detective Janice Moss. She starts going through the pictures of the crime scene and finds that one of her partners, Detective John Loach, is crying in all of them, and that's because Loach and his wife recently split up. Moss kind of expected this, so the guys in tech now are over $50 each. They also suck at their job. At first, they can't find an adapter for the camera. When she comes back in to check on them hours later, they're stuck because the camera is password encrypted. They never stop her as she's trying to punch in a code, and eventually she gets locked out. Because of it, she's forced to call the FBI to get their help. But it's only a matter of time before they find out exactly what is on that lipstick camera. In episode 3, Barry goes to the Bolivian stash house, and he's waiting to kill this Paco guy. He's camped out, he's got his rifle, but before he can even do it, he gets a call from NoHo Hank telling him to hold off, because the Chechens have sent the Bolivians a bullet. Hank is literally waiting for the DHL package to go through. He wants to send a message to the Bolivians. And as soon as they get that message, then Barry has the okay to kill Paco. Barry starts cursing Hank out because he's got a clear shot of Paco, but he can't take it. He thinks the idea of mailing a bullet to send a message is the stupidest thing he's ever heard. He just wants to get this job done with so he can get Fuchs back. When he gets off the phone with Barry, Fuchs asks Hank, "This Bolivian informant seems like a pretty good guy. I mean, why are you sending a bullet? Honestly, why kill him at all?" And Hank lets him know that Goran's been workshopping this, quote, message for a while. They feel like Paco is the perfect person to receive it. And speaking of receiving, Goran receives great news. The Chechens are sending their hitman replacement. It's a legendary killer named Stovka. Right away, both Goran and Hank start freaking out with excitement. The way they talk this guy up, he's like John Wick times 10. Now they just have to wait for Stovka to show up. And Barry is waiting for something to show up. He's waiting for the bullet, which frustrates him even more because he really does have Paco just standing outside asking to be killed. He has to run, though. He's got his acting class to get to. They're going through an exercise where they're supposed to make you feel like you're in a place. Sally performs a scene where she's with her child at an ape pit. When Barry gets up there, though, he tanks. He can't think of anything. Gene basically has to hold his hand through the entire exercise. The good thing for Barry is his embarrassment doesn't last too long because Detective Moss show up, interrupting the entire class because they've kind of been able to discern that Ryan was killed by the Chechens and the Chechens were killed by some mystery person. So they figure that that mystery person either knows Ryan from the gym or the acting class. They're hitting up the acting class first. Gene isn't too thrilled when they interrupt his class, but when they flash a badge, he shuts up pretty quickly. They interview all of the students about how they knew Ryan, if anybody was out to hurt him. And there's the normal reaction of nervousness, but also confusement. At the end of the day, Loesch and Moss don't really get any information. And that includes from Barry, because Barry barely knew him. When Barry walks out of his interview with Loesch and Moss, he goes up to Gene and apologizes for his performance in class. He explains that he really couldn't see anything. Gene tells him, if you want to be an actor, get out of your own way. He thinks that Barry is in his shell and he has to break out. So the way he's going to help him do that is having him do a scene from Glengarry Glen Ross. When he's done talking to Gene, Sally tells him that she booked an audition. She's really excited because her quasi-agent said that they asked for her by name. The issue is she needs a ride. At first, Barry doesn't really want to take her, but reluctantly agrees. Everyone from the class starts leaving as well, and that includes Gene. But before he leaves, he stops by the office that Detective Moss was doing the interviews, and he hits on her aggressively because shooters shoot. Barry and Sally head over to the place that they're holding her audition. They start practicing some lines, and then she gets called in. But when she enters the room, she sees a familiar face. It's a girl named Liv that Sally actually did a TV show with. You would think this would be a good thing, but Sally's so thrown off, especially when she finds out that Liv is playing the lead on this show. And what hurts Sally the most is the fact that on the original TV show where these two met, Sally was the lead. This girl was sixth. Unfortunately, the show never aired because of bad timing. It was about a roller derby team, and it was called Bonnie and the Boston Bombers. So, you can't change that kind of name. You just scrap the show. But this moment is having a negative effect on Sally. She's realizing just how little progress she's made in her career. In fact, it's making her feel like she's going backwards. Liv also tells her that she asked them to bring Sally in. They really didn't think that Sally was right for the role, but Liv told them that she was great. Sally does put in an emotional performance, but it has nothing to do with the words on the page. It has to do more with where her career's at. As Barry is waiting downstairs, he gets a text from NoHo Hank that tells him that DHL has arrived with the bullet, and he's got the okay to kill Paco. As soon as Barry closes his phone, Sally walks down the steps. He can tell that Sally's been crying, and he asks if she's okay, and she says, "My son fell in an ape pit, Barry." And then she just cries right into his arms. She then suddenly says, let's go do something. Let's hang out. And Barry tells her, "I'd love to, but I got to go to work." She kind of looks at him puzzled and says, "Didn't you put in your 2 weeks notice?" And he makes up a lie about how a new shipment's arrived and he has to get in there. She apologizes, saying, "You're right. You've got to pay the bills." And then they walk out to the car together. But they're being watched by one of Goran's men. No idea if Goran's guy followed Barry to his spot where he was planning on killing Paco, because that's exactly where Barry goes. He's got the lines from Gene for Glengarry Glen Ross. He's going over it, and he's waiting for a clear shot to kill Paco. He gets a phone call from Hank wondering if the job's done, and Barry says, no, I'm waiting for a clear shot. It's called being professional. He hangs up on Hank because he gets a phone call from Sally. He starts telling Sally about how many lines he has to read, but she just cuts in with venting about her situation with Liv. The whole day's made her feel like she's just a horrible actress, and Barry has to tell her, no, you're the best actress I know. Sally then asks Barry, can you come over? I just don't want to be alone. And Barry tells her, all right, I'll be over in 30 minutes. This means that Barry has to speed things up. He can't wait for Paco to just come out and give him a clear shot like earlier in the day. He has to go kill this guy now. So he sneaks into the house where Paco is getting the phone call that the Bolivians received a bullet. So the good thing for Hank is message received. The bad thing for Barry is Paco ends up seeing Barry and taking off. Barry, though, is able to wrangle him down, choke him out, and kill him. He starts driving over to Sally's place, talking to her on the phone, and then he gets a phone call from Hank. He yells at him, it's done, release Fuchs, and he continues on his way. As soon as he gets to Sally's, she kisses him, and they end up hooking up. Back over at Goran's place, it was a pretty eventful day. Stovka arrived, but he is old as hell. I mean, this guy's got to be 85. Goran tells Stovka in Chechen that they hired this Barry guy to go kill a Bolivian. But when he gets back, Stovka is to kill both Barry and Fuchs. And he's saying this right in front of Fuchs. And for Fuchs, it's not hard to figure out the message. Because of this, as soon as Goran leaves, Fuchs goes into damage control, trying to talk Stovka out of it, saying that he can just walk away, start a new life in America, find a girl. Through conversing with Stovka, Fuchs finds out that Stovka is actually like 45. But Stovka has done a lot of soul-searching recently. Because he was forced to come to America, he lost his family, and he can't take it anymore. Or maybe he just can't take Fuchs not shutting up. Either way, instead of killing Fuchs, Stovka ends up killing himself. It leaves Goran in another tight bind, because this is the second hitman he's lost in about a week. On top of it, Goran realizes he can't tell his family about this. They're going to be livid. Fuchs sees this as an opportunity. He starts selling Goran on Barry being the Chechen hitman. Goran brings Fuchs into the dining room and gives him a meal, although he's still chained up. And Fuchs gives Goran his professional opinion. He asks Goran, what exactly do you want? Goran tells him that he wants what the Bolivians have, which is a stash house that makes a ton of money. Fuchs tells him, then go get it. You're trying to create this mood with a bullet. I mean, this isn't theater, it's business. If you want to get a man's attention, take something away from him. Goran's a little hesitant because the Bolivian that runs the stash house is a guy named Cristobal Fuentes, and he's a little crazy. Fuchs tells Goran, here's what you do. You take his stash house, and when he comes up to L.A. to deal with it, you kill him too. Of course, Goran wouldn't kill him. Barry would. As Barry lays in Sally's bed, she decides to set him up with a Facebook account. They've added everybody from class, and then she asks, is there anybody else you want to add? And he remembers a guy he served with named Chris Lucado. Sally finds him right away and adds him. Sally, though, has to get ready. She's got a big audition, so she kicks Barry out. With nowhere else to go, Barry heads to Fuchs' hotel, and Fuchs gives him the good news about their new job. Fuchs downplays the job, but when Barry opens the envelope and sees how many guys it is and how big the location is, he says, Fuchs, this isn't a job, it's a damn raid. Fuchs tells him, I know it's not a regular job, but Goran wants this stash house, and if he gets it, his profits go up, and he takes us along with him. He then distracts him with a wad of cash from the Paco hit. Barry asks him, so what, you're just going to stay in L.A. too? And Fuchs says, yeah, it's great. I mean, these guys were about to take us out, and now they can't take us out if they wanted to. You're welcome. Later that day, Barry heads to class. As he's sitting waiting for Gene to show up, he gets the alert that Chris, his former Marine buddy, has accepted his friend request. Chris even messages him and says, hey man, you in town? Let's get a drink. Barry messages him back, but most of the class is talking about Natalie's party she's having that night. She's bringing a buddy who just rapped Shooting Pinocchio. He played Pinocchio. Because of that, she doesn't want people bringing plus ones. You know, big star in the room. Gene shows up and that quiets everybody up. Actually, they bust out in applause, but Gene starts the lesson, and it's Glengarry Glen Ross. He's given Barry quite the monologue. It's the coffee is for closers scene. But Barry bombs. Gene can't take it anymore. He actually has to stop and tell Barry how bad of a job he's doing. He asks Barry, do you want to be a doormat your entire life? Because that's all we've ever seen here. And I'm willing to bet it's no different out there. Gene is trying the same thing he tried on Sally a couple weeks ago. He's trying to rip a good performance out of Barry. We don't know if he gets it or not, but what we do know is, after class, Barry heads, finds Fuchs, curses him out, and tells him he's not doing it. He also tells him that he's going back to Ohio and Barry's staying in LA. Fuchs doesn't really seem too intimidated by the conversation, though. One person that wasn't in class that day was Sally because she had that audition. She had to skip class because she had to go meet with her quasi-agent. He's not her agent yet, but he does book her roles. As they're talking about the role she's going out for, he very seriously says, I get to this point with a lot of potential clients. I think to myself, do I want to sign them or do I want to fuck them? Sally doesn't know quite what to say. Eventually, she blurts out how she wants to keep it professional, and the guy actually gets a joke, although it didn't seem like a joke. Sally then heads off to the audition, but the employee at the production company has to pull her aside and say, hey, we just called your agent. He said he doesn't represent you. It's incredibly embarrassing for Sally. She has to walk out with her head held high, but she doesn't even get to audition for this role. She just heads to her car and bawls her eyes out. She'll at least be able to blow off some steam at the party that night. Barry is coming, and he's bringing her a gift. He noticed that her computer screen was cracked, so he bought her a new one. As he's driving over there, he starts daydreaming about his life with Sally together and how this could be a big moment in their relationship. This could be when she finally knew that he was the one, when he bought her a MacBook. He's also dressed pretty ridiculously. For whatever reason, he's carrying a satchel or a courier bag or whatever you want to call it, but he looks stupid. He saw it at J. Crew and the whole outfit was on the mannequin, so he said, I'll take it. As soon as he enters the party, Natalie comes up to him and says, Did you see? You see my friend Zach Burrows is here? And Zach was the one who played Pinocchio. He's also the one no one knows really who he is, but he is the biggest star at the party. People are globbing onto him. Barry asks her, how did you guys meet? And she says, well, there was like a special anonymous group for people and can't really talk about it, but yeah, so she's an addict. Barry then sees Sally and makes a beeline over to her. He asks how the audition went, and she lies and said it went great. She notices he's holding a laptop, and she says, what's up with that? And he hands it over to her. But it has the adverse effect of what he thought it would have. Instead of being touched, she's a little weirded out because that laptop is extremely expensive. And after all, they only slept with each other one time. She basically gives it back to him. Barry walks off to get a drink, but he checks his Facebook Messenger, and his buddy Chris had texted him saying he was getting beer with two Marines and if he wanted to join. Barry responded with, well, do you guys want to come to a party instead? Chris said yes, and Barry sent him the address. So Barry's standing in the party, waiting for his buddies to arrive. But one buddy of Barry's that he wasn't expecting does arrive, and it's Fuchs. Barry is so angry and taken off guard that Fuchs has invaded this part of his life. Fuchs is concerned with the fact that he was tailing Barry all day and Barry didn't notice, which is part of Barry's job. Barry tells Fuchs, you gotta leave. But Fuchs tells him, the thing that hurts the most is you lied to me. You're still going to that class. Barry, of course, admits that he is. At this point, jig's up. Fuchs tells him that he wants him to have that, but he also doesn't want him to screw up their thing. Fuchs can tell that he's making Barry extremely nervous, so he uses it as leverage, telling Barry, I wouldn't want to tell all these people who you really are after all, right? And he's able to bully Barry into taking the Bolivian stash house job. A little while later, his buddy Chris does show up. They catch up pretty quickly, but Natalie has an issue. It's not Chris, it's the two other Marines that he brought, because they're like two giant meatheads. They're acting like two 6-year-old boys. The problem is they're grown men and they're huge. Their names are Taylor and Vaughn. And they're ex-Marines, but they're also making Natalie completely uncomfortable. They're so intimidating that she doesn't want to tell them to leave, but she definitely wants them to leave. They continue to stay, drinking the free alcohol, and at one point Taylor asks which one of the girls is Barry's, and Barry points out, oh no, my girlfriend's the blonde. But the blonde, a.k.a. Sally, is busy talking to Pinocchio. They're having an innocent enough conversation about how he got the role and what he was doing on set, yada, yada, yada. But to a couple of meatheads far away, it looks like this guy's hitting on Sally. So a drunk Barry walks up to him and says, hey, that's my girl. I don't think she wants you talking to her. Of course, Sally is not his girl, and Sally is pissed off by this. She ends up walking away, and when Barry chases after her, she says, the hell was that? He tells her, I just didn't like the way you were talking to that guy. And she says, you didn't like the way I was talking to that guy? Who the hell asked you? We slept together one time. And what, now I'm your girl? Do not tell me what I am. And then she goes on a whole rant about how people tell her what she is, but they don't know what she is. He doesn't even have time to process the conversation because Natalie runs up to him and says, your friend's got to go. They're roughhousing so much that she can't take it anymore. But the bigger problem is they're roughhousing near Pinocchio. So Barry and his buddies get kicked out, but they're planning on hanging out later that night. Barry, who is drunk, pulls out the wad of cash that he has, and Taylor notices it. So he says, I'm going to ride with Barry. When Taylor and Barry get in the car, Taylor says, something's not right. You got all this from auto parts? You have that fancy computer, the new clothes, the nice car. And then he pulls out the Bolivian stash house envelope with all the information in it and tells Barry, whatever this is, I want in. So Barry had quite an interesting night, and he's not the only one. His acting coach did as well. Jean wanted to see Detective Moss again, so he called her up saying he had inside information, but the only way she could get it was to meet him for dinner. She was waiting for the FBI to find out exactly what was on that lipstick cam, so instead of just wait around, she decided, what the hell, let's see what the guy has to say. They meet for what is unequivocally known as a date, and the information that Jean has isn't that good. Moss tries to leave, but Jean calls her out and says, where are you going? What are you rushing back to? He starts making the case that whatever Moss would be rushing back to isn't as good as what she's got right in front of her, so she decides to stay. And the truth is, she ends up having a really good time. Before, she would roll her eyes at Jean, but now she's oddly attracted to him. Although she snapped out of that trance when her phone goes off, telling her that the FBI was able to find out what was on that lipstick cam. Jean asks her, do you want to do this again next week? And at first she says no because she's investigating the murder of one of his students, but when she leaves, it seems like they're planning on meeting again. Moss heads back to the office to find out what was on that cam, and there's Barry shooting the Chechens, but the thing is, you can't make out his face. But even though they can't make out his face, Moss knows that the profile on the screen is definitely recognizable to somebody out there. In episode 5, Taylor has been blowing up Barry's phone about the mission. Barry, though, doesn't know if he wants to go into business with Taylor. He has to do some background check on him. And by background check, I mean he has to go and talk to Chris, because Chris is the one who introduced the two. He goes and meets with Chris, along with Chris's family, at an amusement park, and asks what's the deal with Taylor. Chris tells him that he honestly doesn't really know. He met Taylor in a program that helps vets reacclimate to society, but Taylor got kicked out. Barry asks him if he's a solid guy, and Chris says yeah. He then proceeds to tell a story about how Taylor broke a guy's jaw all because he spilled a drink on Chris's leg. Later on, when Barry is asked to take a family photo, Chris asks him not to tell his wife that he was hanging out with Taylor because she's not a fan. So there are red flags all over this dude. After hanging out with Chris, he heads over to the acting class, where roles are being assigned for the annual Shakespeare Showcase. Barry hangs back because he wants to talk to Sally. He's been trying to get in touch with her, but she hasn't responded. He starts apologizing for his behavior, but she's being super short with him. He asks her if he can take her to dinner, and she says, yeah, no, totally, or we could not speak to each other for a couple of days. Or even like a month or two, we could reset that way. Because I feel like you have some toxic masculinity issues that you need to work out. Until then, we probably shouldn't interact so much or like at all. But she's going to have to interact with Barry because she finds out that they're scene partners together. Sally didn't get the role that she thinks she should have gotten, which is Lady Macbeth, and that does not make her happy. Jean then comes outside and alerts the class that there's somebody there to talk to him about Ryan's murder. Detective Moss has come by with a picture of the assailant. Problem is, the picture sucks and no one can make out exactly who he is. For now, it's the best thing that they have. At the end of striking out, she has to speak with Eric, Jermaine, and Barry in private because those are the only guys in the class that match the perp's description. She asks Barry where he served in the Marines and for his alibi that night. Barry tells her that he had dinner with a guy named Frank Ewing, and then after that, the two went and had drinks with a guy named Ramon Diaz. When Detective Moss goes and checks these alibis, both are Fuchs. He has a briefcase full of cell phones that he answers with duct tape around it that tells him exactly who the phone is for. So when he answers the Frank Ewing one, he acts like this guy named Frank Ewing, and when he answers the Ramon Diaz one, he throws on an accent. He really should be the one in the acting class because he nails it. Detective Moss buys all of it and lets Barry go on his way. After Barry's alibi checks out, him and Fuchs head over to talk to the Chechens because the police visited Goran after all the guys that were killed were Goran's associates. They ask Goran if he recognized the voice in the lipstick camera, and of course he does. He knows it's Hank's, but he doesn't give Hank up. He is, however, pissed off at Hank for what he did. He also feels like this is a terrible time to do the Bolivian stash house hit. Barry agrees. Fuchs does not. He takes Goran aside to have a one-on-one with him to try to convince him to do the Bolivian stash house hit. It's just Barry and Hank's a little nervous because he knows since the police showed up, he's probably a dead man. He looks for sympathy from Barry, but Barry doesn't give him any. He says, Goran should kill you. You brought a lipstick camera to a hit. You're an idiot. When Goran and Fuchs return, Fuchs has been able to convince Goran to put the hit back on. That doesn't really sit well with Barry because he just got grilled by a cop, but Fuchs puts on the charm and convinces him that he can do it, no problem. He agrees to do it, but he tells Fuchs about Taylor and the fact that Taylor wants in on the hit. The two head back to the hotel room, and after he's had some time to think about it, Fuchs has agreed to let Taylor in on the hit. That's all very surprising to Barry. He thought that the Taylor angle would have Fuchs call the hit off. Fuchs, however, seems dead set on doing this hit. He does tell Barry when it's over, you gotta kill him. Barry is conflicted about that because Taylor is a Marine, but Fuchs couldn't care less. Feels like he just knows too much and he's gotta go. The two argue back and forth about whether or not Taylor has to die. When the voices in the room kind of settle, Fuchs looks at Barry and says, you do know that Taylor has to die, right? And deep down, Barry does know. And Fuchs has this way over Barry where he's able to convince him to do things he doesn't want to do, and this is another example of that. The next day, Barry heads off to acting class. And Barry's in a fine mood, but Sally isn't. She's still jealous over the fact that she didn't get Lady Macbeth. Sally decides to point out that it's not working with Natalie as Lady Macbeth. This prompts Jean to stand up and ask the class what the scene is about. They start talking about the stain in Macbeth and what it means for killing. Barry, though, actually having killed people, disagrees with the sentiment. The more the class talks about it, the more that they're painting Macbeth out to be this psycho murderer. And the more that Barry listens to it, the more he feels like it's his relationship with Fuchs. Fuchs being Lady Macbeth, him being Macbeth. They all think that Macbeth is going to be messed up for life, and Barry just doesn't. The more the class mansplains to Barry, I actually don't know if you can mansplain to a man, but you get my rift, about Macbeth, the more that he disagrees. Sally finally says, oh my god, are we really debating the morality of murder? Macbeth is a murderer. And Barry kind of snaps, saying, well, then I guess so am I. I mean, I've killed people. What, should I just go blow my brains out? I mean, there's no hope for me, right? All because I was ordered to kill somebody and I did it? That doesn't make me a psycho. Sasha says, no, Barry, none of us are saying that. None of us said you were a psycho. But Barry cuts her off and screams, you all just said that. It's exactly what you said. And it's really easy for you guys to sit here and weigh in on some stuff that you don't know about, but it's not true. Jean has to step in and have everybody just take a breath and take a break. The fact is, the class never thought about what it means for soldiers. So Jean says, I think we can all agree that if you kill outside of war, then you're a psycho. That really doesn't help Barry either, and he ends up leaving the class early. He heads back to the hotel room and has dinner with Fuchs. The rest of the class feels really bad about what they did. They all forgot he was a Marine. And Sally's the only one to speak up saying, does that really make what he did okay? I mean, he screamed at us. I think he owes us all a huge apology. Nobody really seems to agree with her on that, though. But now that we're talking about apologies, Natalie demands one from Sally about Zach, who was that Pinocchio boy. Natalie felt like she kind of called dibs, and Sally's the one who ended up leaving the party with him. And that is something that everybody agrees on. It's pretty awkward in that bar. At the same time that they were arguing about how bad Sally sucks, Detective Moss and Detective Loach were arguing. Because all three suspects alibied out, but something in Moss's gut tells him that they're not finished and they're just missing something, which Loach thinks is ridiculous. After work, Moss needs to blow off some steam, and there's only one place she can do it. Gene Cousineau's house. She jumps on top of him as soon as he opens the door, which he is all for. But that is the same night as the Bolivian stash house hit. After having dinner with Fuchs, Barry calls up Taylor and the two meet up. They go over the floor plan and exactly what they're supposed to do. The two Marines then head in. Two Marines versus a stash house full of Bolivians. When they enter, the Bolivians, they're in shock. Barry and Taylor light them up. They quickly start making their way through the stash house, picking off the Bolivians one by one. But Taylor gets tired of just sticking to the plan, and he straight Leroy Jenkins into there. And if you don't know what that means, after this video, go Google Leroy Jenkins. Classic video. Taylor is bogged down, but he is taking out the Bolivians. He does need backup, however, and he's calling for Barry to give it to him, but Barry is frozen still. As Barry is contemplating what to do, he gets pistol whipped by a Bolivian. He wakes up with all the Bolivians dead and Taylor standing there. Taylor is so pumped up, especially when he finds all of the money that they had. After all, the mission was just to eliminate the targets. They said nothing about the actual stash in the stash house. But now's the time where Barry has to kill Taylor. He can't bring himself to do it. And when he meets with Fuchs in the morning, Fuchs is ecstatic because he thought that Barry was dead for sure. So he's just happy to see his old friend again. He also starts talking to Barry about how difficult it must have been to kill Taylor. And that's when Taylor shows up. Barry introduces the two, and Fuchs is stunned. So like it or not, Taylor is in on the operation. And in episode 6, that doesn't sit well with Fuchs. The three of them are surveying the location where the Bolivian boss will land once he finds out the stash house was hit. Fuchs is still fuming about what happened. He knows that Barry is just trying to stick him with Taylor so he can go off and be an actor. It really infuriates him. After surveying the location, Taylor and Barry go to hang out at Taylor's place, which looks like a frat boy's house. There's pizza boxes, there's beer bottles, there's posters on the wall. Oh, and he's watching porn. Barry starts pitching Taylor on taking over the operation, becoming Fuchs' number one go-to guy. But when Taylor finds out that Fuchs takes 50% of the cut, he is out. He doesn't like Fuchs already. The fact that he takes 50%, he feels like he's ripping Barry off. He also thinks it's suspicious that if it's such a good job, why does Barry want out? Barry covers that up by saying he just wants to branch out and do different things. Taylor asks him he won't let you do those other opportunities. And Barry says it sounds like that, but it's not the case, even though it completely is. That's when Taylor says you should probably just kill the guy. He then gives Barry his cut of the stash house money, which is a whole lot. But Barry doesn't want it because it's dirty. It's got to be cleaned. Barry then tries to get the conversation back to Taylor becoming Fuchs' go-to guy. And he tells him that if he just gives Fuchs a chance, he'll see that he's a great guy. But the way that Taylor sees it, he could kill Fuchs, take that money he just gave him, and go off and live his dreams. Barry goes to the bathroom and starts visualizing what that dream would be. But as he's in there, Taylor is outside dumping all of that money into Barry's backpack. So when Barry leaves, he has no idea that he has a backpack full of dirty cash. Barry then heads off to acting class. While Barry and Taylor were talking about Taylor taking over the job, Goran, Hank, and Antonio head to their new stash house. As they're celebrating their mini victory, Antonio shows Goran all the photos he took of Barry not doing the job. He doesn't like Barry because Barry killed his brother, which Hank says, you got to get over that, man. But this backfires on Antonio. Goran gets angry at him because the whole point of hiring Barry was so there would be no connection to the Chechens. With Antonio following him around, there is now a connection. Goran tells him under no circumstance should he kill Barry. And if he can't kill Barry, Antonio's going to do the next best thing. He's going to try to kill Sally. Sally is at the acting class, as is Barry. And shortly after arriving, Barry feels the need to apologize to the class for jumping down their throats. They in turn apologize to him for being insensitive to his previous history. Barry then dips into his bag to get his script, and that's when he sees the money. He knows that he can't just walk around town with it. He's got to do something with it. So he runs to the bathroom, and he stashes all of it in the ceiling. But he's got to do it fast because he has to get back on stage to practice Macbeth. He's struggling. He's got a lot on his mind, and he's just not doing the job. This prompts Gene to get up and start doing an exercise where Barry says something to Sally, and Sally says something back to Barry. It's the same exact words, but they're saying it differently. And the phrase that Barry decides to use is, I love you, which annoys Sally. Gene can't pick up on the fact that this isn't just a normal statement by Barry. These two have a history. Barry completes the class, is heading home, and checks his voicemails, where he's got 2 voicemails, one from Fuchs and one from Taylor. Taylor's asking Barry if he's killed Fuchs yet. Fuchs is asking Barry if he's killed Taylor yet. Barry can't live like this. He knows he has to do something, so his solution is to call up Taylor and tell him that he's just going to do this job alone. He cites a lack of manpower and the fact that he wants to be low profile, and Taylor doesn't really react. He just keeps saying to Barry, Now that that's done, Barry can plan to do this job tomorrow by himself, like he always wanted to. But back at the acting class, Sally sticks behind to talk to Gene. She feels like her scene isn't working. She's not challenged by her role. So what she proposes to Gene is that she become Macbeth. Gene eventually agrees to it, and Sally is on cloud 9. She's thrilled. As she's walking out of the acting class, she's unknowingly being followed by Antonio, but she has a guardian angel. Janice had also stopped by the acting class. Her and Gene have been a regular thing for about a week, but she figured that she needed to break it off with him. After all, she still is investigating the acting class, even though every one of her coworkers says not to. Jean asks her if she continues to investigate the class because she wants to deny what they could have together. She thought about it, went into work, and took down all of the pictures of the suspects from the acting class, closing it out. She then headed to the acting class to let Jean know about it, and that's when she saw the suspicious guy following Sally to her car. She started asking him a series of questions, and something about this guy just did not sit right with her at all. Mainly his accent and the fact that she couldn't picture him being an actor. She tells him to freeze, and he runs off. She runs after him. They get into a shootout where eventually Janice ends up killing Antonio. She calls the police, including Loach, and not too long later, the building where the acting class is located is swarmed by police. Janice also finds the money that Barry stashed away. She can't figure out what it all means. Her best theory is that maybe Ryan wasn't just sleeping with Goran's wife, maybe he was using her to be in business with the Chechens, using this place as a quasi-stash house. The one question that Loach has, though, is if Janice decided that the acting class had no leads, what was she doing there? He knows the answer. He knows it's Jean. And she apologizes, saying it's over. She's now ready to go to work. The next day, so does Barry. He has to get to work. But when he heads down to the hotel lobby, he's surprised to see Taylor in full-on fatigues, looking like he's ready to go to Fallujah. He's not quite sure what Taylor's up to and tells him, you got to leave, and then he sees it. Taylor's not alone. It's Taylor, Chris, and Nick, all in a car. Taylor heard what Barry said. He didn't have enough firepower, so he gets some. They're heading to the location, and Barry tries to tell Chris to get out of the car, but he won't. Like it or not, these four guys are about to go to battle together. But the plan that Barry, Fuchs, and Taylor had concocted about doing this somewhat stealthily doesn't end up happening. Because when Taylor put Barry's money in his bag, he saw Jean's book, and he read it. In the book, Jean talks about making the unsafe choice, and heading straight into this location would be unsafe. And in fact, it is. Barry begs and pleads for them to turn around, but Taylor doesn't do it, and the car is riddled with bullets, killing, at the very least, the two guys in the front seat, Taylor and Nick. Episode 7 picks up with the aftermath. Barry and Chris survived, and unfortunately for them, it was just bad timing. They showed up 2 minutes too late, because the head of the Bolivians, Cristobal, flew in, touched down, and that's exactly when Taylor came in Rambo style and got himself killed. One of Cristobal's men goes to check who exactly just tried to kill them and sees that it was two guys in a military uniform. He also sees that somebody got away, so he starts looking for Barry. He radios Cristobal to tell him, and Cristobal decides to phone up Goran, which comes as a complete surprise to Goran. He explains to Goran that he had to fly in because he found out that Goran took his stash house, and if Goran had just called and asked to go partners in on the deal, he would have agreed to it. The picture that Fuchs had painted of Cristobal being this bloodthirsty monster could not be farther from the truth. He's actually a super nice guy. But since Goran just sent a hitman to kill him after killing most of his guys, he has to retaliate. Goran tries to explain that that same hitman killed a few of his guys as well, so it should be even Steven, but Cristobal doesn't see it that way. As Goran and Cristobal are talking it out, Barry is trying to elude Cristobal's guy. He also has an issue because he's supposed to be at practice that day, and his phone is blowing up from Sally wondering where he's at. Eventually, he's caught, but the Bolivian who catches him is unaware that Chris is standing right behind him with a gun. For whatever reason, though, Chris is frozen still. He can't shoot the guy, even though Barry is screaming at him that he needs to, because if that Bolivian radios to Cristobal, they're both dead. It's a pretty close call, but eventually Chris pulls the trigger, killing the guy, and the two get the hell out of there. But now Barry needs to get rid of the gun, drop Chris off, and get to practice. Doesn't leave a lot of time to fill Fuchs in. And Fuchs is a little concerned because he hasn't heard from Barry yet. Fuchs ends up calling up Hank, and Hank tells him Barry's dead. Because all they were told by Cristobal was two military guys. They just assumed that it was Barry and somebody else. And Fuchs, hearing that, thinks that it was Barry and Taylor. Fuchs is depressed. Even later that night, he calls up Hank, and the two start talking about the fact that they're shocked Barry isn't there anymore. After being all sentimental, Fuchs asks Hank, "So, are we good?" And Hank says, "Oh, no, we're not good. Goran is pissed at you, because you convinced him that Cristobal was this horrible monster and the Bolivians needed to die, but apparently he's a super nice guy, and now we have to go to war with him. So wherever you go, we're going to find you and kill you. Not great news for Fuchs. But Fuchs will feel better once he finds out that his friend is alive. Barry arrives at acting class where Sally first questions where he was because he looks like crap, but then fills him in on the fact that the police showed up, found all that money, and now think that Ryan was connected with the mob in some way. They then get ready for practice, and Barry just has one line to say, but Chris has been blowing up his phone. Chris is freaking out a little bit, and Barry tells him, "You gotta relax, man, and stop calling me." It distracts him so much that he misses his line. When he finally does deliver it, he delivers it pretty poorly. Gene sits him down to have a conversation because he thinks Barry's on drugs. And as far as Gene's concerned, that's a normal progression for an actor. He understands it. But when Barry tells him he's not on drugs, that's when Gene gets truly concerned. Because if Barry can't deliver one line, one simple line, then maybe he can't be an actor. So Barry has to stew on that for the rest of the night. But now that they've found the money, the cops have reopened the case. And they've bugged Goran's phone. So they have the entire conversation with Chris Duvall taped and recorded. As they're listening to it, they hear Goran talk about this military hitman that he hired that killed a bunch of his men as well. There's only one person that fits that description from the acting class, and it's Barry. Moss grabs Barry's picture and heads to Facebook looking for Barry Berkman, but she doesn't find anybody. And that's when Loach comes over and lets her know that police found a vehicle all shot up near an airstrip. 2 dead bodies, both military. Moss is convinced that one of them is going to be Barry, but Loach says, no, it's not. They're able to ID Taylor first, so they head on over to his place to search it around. It's at his apartment that they find a bag full of cash, just like the bag full of cash they found at the theater. It's the same exact amount, too, which leads them to believe that they split it. As far as Loach is concerned, Taylor and Ryan must have been working together. Moss isn't ready to jump into that conclusion because they need a connection, and then she finds it. It's Gene's acting book, where when you open it up, the first page says Ryan Madison. That is the connection that they needed. Even though he doesn't know it, this is a huge break for Barry. But he's still got a major issue. The next day, Chris continues to blow up his phone, so finally he meets with Chris. And Chris tells him, I never killed anybody, man. I was never in it like that. I was logistics. He starts blaming Barry for even making him do that in the first place, and eventually he says, we gotta go to the cops. Barry looks at him like he's crazy and says, we're not going to the cops, man. What do you think I do for a living? This is it. And the people that I work for, they won't just come after you. They'll come after your family as well. Chris asks, what if I just turn myself in? But Barry reminds him, we're linked, man. Facebook, they'll put it all together. They'll find out about me. They'll find out about Fuchs. They'll find out about the acting class. Everybody will be dead. And Chris yells, well, I don't care about that. I killed a guy. You might be cool with that, but I'm not. I got a wife and a kid. And my wife, she knew. She knew there was something wrong, Barry. I told her I was going to the gym, but it's only a matter of time before I get back and she starts grilling me and I come clean. I'm going to the cops. I'm telling them everything. And Barry at first says, why did you say that? But then he screams, why did you say that? Because now Barry knows he has to kill Chris. And Chris knows it too. He knows he messed up. He tries to backpedal, telling Barry that he actually told his wife he was going to meet Barry, thinking maybe that would help. But it doesn't. Barry pulls out a gun, shoots Chris, and leaves the body, making it look like Chris committed suicide. He then heads over to the acting class where they have their big Shakespeare performance, and they're doing this in front of a bunch of talent scouts. Well, at least one talent scout that Sally invited. Barry's really in no rush, which is going to screw with Sally's performance if he doesn't arrive. Believe it or not, that one line is a big line. So Sally's freaking out a little bit, and no one's willing to help her because Sally's, some would say driven, I would say a bitch. But luckily for her, Barry arrives just in the nick of time, although he is not in the right headspace at all. He keeps thinking about Chris and his family. Right before they go out there, Sally explains the agent that's out there. He used to be Emma Stone's agent before she got too big and fired him. Sally wants that for herself. She wants to be so big that she can fire that guy. But before that happens, she has to get hired by him. This is her chance. Sally gets out there, starts performing Macbeth, but backstage, Barry is freaking out. He can't shake it. The idea of Chris's wife getting the phone call that he's dead, and he knows that it's because of him. It's one thing to kill people you don't know, but he had to kill somebody he did know. When it comes time to deliver the line, Barry comes out, bawling his eyes out, and says, "My lord, the queen is dead." And he's really emotional about it. It draws out a great performance from Sally, one that gets noticed by the agent. It also gets noticed by Gene. When they're done, Gene goes to the back to see where Barry is and finds him, congratulating him on an unbelievable performance. He doesn't know where it came from. He doesn't know if Barry can get it again. And that's when Barry screams and punches a picture, busting his hand up pretty good. Gene realizes that whatever place Barry was in on the stage, he's currently still in, so he gets the hell out of there pretty quickly. Eventually, Barry collects himself, going to try to find Sally, where he sees the tail end of a conversation between Sally and the agent, with the agent telling Sally, "Call my office, we'll get a meeting scheduled." And Sally is on cloud 9. She starts thanking Barry for giving her that performance, because that performance led to her getting this meeting with the agent. She tells Barry, "Tonight, you were a real actor. So whatever you did to get in this space, this is your new routine. This worked for you." Of course, Sally has no idea that in order to get to that space, Barry had to kill one of his friends. And in the season finale, Barry heads back to the hotel and goes to see Fuchs. And Fuchs is thrilled to see him because he thought he was dead. Barry doesn't feel the same way. He grabs the money and puts it in a bag and says, "I'm taking this, it's mine." And when Fuchs tries to stop him, Barry lays him out and leaves. Fuchs heads to go visit Goran to let him know that Barry's alive. But before he can get to Goran, he sees Hank first. In the living room, they have all of these guys ready to go to war, and Hank tells them that everybody's kind of on edge because of the Bolivian thing. They make their way to the garage where Goran is still very pissed off at Fuchs. He feels like he screwed everything up by forcing him into a war with the Bolivians. Fuchs tries to bring up the point that it was Goran who said he wanted the stash house, and Fuchs just kind of pushed him to go get what he wanted, but Goran doesn't want to hear it. He then tells the whole room that Barry's alive, which comes as a huge shock to Hank. He can't believe it. But Fuchs is about to double-cross Barry, because he tells Goran, "I know where he is, and I can give him to you. All I want in return is to know that me and you are good." But Goran isn't interested in the deal, because he knows where to find Barry. He knows all about the acting class. And that definitely puts a wrench in Fuchs' plans. One of Goran's men then punches Fuchs' tooth out. They strap him down into a chair, and they introduce him to the new torturer of the group. Everybody then leaves Fuchs and the new guy into the room to let the new guy kill Fuchs and chop him up. Goran's whole plan is to kill Fuchs and then head to the acting class to kill Barry. But Hank points out, if I'm Barry, I'm not sticking around for this acting class. I'm leaving town. Goran, however, has heard enough from Hank. He doesn't really think he's loyal, and he thinks he's an idiot. And he's partly right. Hank isn't loyal. He sneaks away and calls up Barry, who has made his way to the beach, to let Barry know that they're coming for him at the acting class and he should avoid it. So if they're heading for him, he might as well head and kill them first. He heads over to the Chechen's house, where Goran is getting into it with the new guy about why Fuchs is still alive. And that's when Barry shoots up the entire room, killing all of the Chechens, including Goran, and leaving Fuchs alive. The two then get out of there before they have to kill any more Chechens. And the only Chechen left is Hank. He drops by the garage to give everybody some refreshments, and that's when he sees everybody's dead. And then he hears police copters, because Moss and Loach got a warrant to search the property. And Hank knows they're coming for him. He's able to get away and sneak off to the stash house, where he meets up with Cristoval. Or at least it looks like Cristoval. It might be another Bolivian. But Hank is now firmly in control, and he plans on linking up with the Bolivians and taking over the entire town. It's ironic, too, because they're watching the police press conference where they're putting it all together. Ryan and Taylor working together to put these two drug families at a war together so they could gain from the profits. Barry doesn't see any of it, because Barry drove Fuchs to the airport and told him to get lost. He never wants to speak to him again. Fuchs has no choice but to leave town, although he's doing so without his tooth. Barry wouldn't allow him to grab it at Goran's house, and it is picked up by the police. After he drops off Fuchs, Barry heads to the bar, where he lets Sally know he's done with the acting class. And she can't believe it, because the two work really well together. One of the reasons why he's dropping the class is because he doesn't know if he can ever get to that state again. He doesn't want to dig deep into that process. Sally reveals to him that she used to be married, and the guy used to beat the crap out of her. In order to get that emotional on stage, she thinks about that moment in her life, and it helps. It's tough, but it makes her a better actor. She then tells Barry that she wants to do a play with him, called The Front Page. Barry's never heard of it, but he also can't say no to Sally. Couple weeks later, they're practicing their lines for the front page at a beautiful lakeside home that belongs to Gene. And Barry's life couldn't be any better. He's now with Sally. They're happy. And Gene is with Janice. Janice arrives and Gene starts showing her around the place. She then notices that the poster for the show doesn't say Barry Berkman, it says Barry Block. And Barry explains that's his acting name, it just sounded better. The four then have dinner that night, where after discussing Barry's goals in acting, Gene tells Janice and Sally that the first time he ever heard Barry's monologue, it was amazing. It was all about this soldier who was only good at killing and came back and wanted to be an actor. He was blown away by it. Barry, however, gets extremely uncomfortable. Because if Janice is smart, she can easily put all of this together. She doesn't lead on that she's on to anything, though. Just continuing normal dinner chit-chat. But she heard all of it and did file it away. And late in the night, she sneaks off to the dock to covertly look up Barry Block on Facebook. Barry Block leads her to Chris Lucato, who leads her to Taylor. She now knows that it was Barry the entire time. But she has a big issue. Barry is standing right behind her. Barry tries to explain that he used to work for some people that had him do terrible things, and he realized what he was doing was wrong. He did what he had to do to get out of it, and he's in a great place now. So if she could just possibly find it in her heart to just ignore everything that she just saw, it would do everybody a world of good. The problem is Janice can't do that. She's a cop, and she knows now that Barry is a murderer. She tells Barry to start making his way back up to the house, and Barry is pleading with her not to do this. And there's a reason for that. It's because he hid away a gun with a silencer on it. Barry has no choice but to kill Janice. He then goes off, hides her body somewhere, and gets back in bed in the wee hours of the morning as if nothing happened. And that is the end of Season 1 of Barry. Thank you so much for getting to this point of the recap. Check out my Season 2 recap of Barry. Tell your friends. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the thumbs up button. Hit the thumbs down button. Leave me nasty comments in the comment section. You guys know what to do.